Good morning. Thank you so much for being with me this morning. It's early, and I'm not the early bird, and I can understand that it might be an interest in my presentation that brought you here. So I'm starting my presentation with this image of the old bridge in Mostar, built in 16th century, destroyed in 1993, and fully reconstructed, designated after reconstruction as a World Heritage Site. The celebration of its reconstruction is, in fact, some kind of interpretation of reclaimed right to live, to exist, to have identity, reclaim the right to have the urban framework of belonging to, and also the right to memorialization. So the celebration goes on every year. It is one of more than 1,000 heritage places. Not all of them are World Heritage places, but some of them that are not World Heritage sites are even more significant for society and community than those that are. And that's one of more than 1,000 that were reconstructed. I'm stressing this word that has been some kind of, let's say, almost expelled, forbidden word in theory and practice, more in theory, less in practice, more in doctrine, less in practice in Europe, since even before the Second World War. The Faro Convention did not emerge in vacuum. It was drafted between 2003 and 2005 by a select expert group at a very moment in European and global history. I was lucky to be one of the 16 experts working on drafting Faro Convention, and those 2 years were some kind of a wonderful exchange with my peers, colleagues from across Europe working on this document. Discussions were leading us to unpacking all the concepts concerning cultural heritage, and after several meetings, we decided to go out of the box and to switch some, or to turn upside down some kind of approaches, concepts, even definitions. This was a time when Europe was redefining itself. The early 2000s marked the largest wave of European Union enlargement, bringing in countries from Central and Eastern Europe after decades of division. At the same time, Europe was confronting the realities of increased migration and growing cultural diversity. And this migration at that time was mainly from the European continent, from what's called Balkan region, Southeastern Europe, and Caucasus region, and the former Soviet Union. Although, due to the ongoing wars in Afghanistan, etc., there was influx coming from the other parts, the other continents, but it was the largest movement of people inside the continent through the what is European Union. So this migration and growing cultural diversity that was a result of them, alongside rising anxieties about identity and cohesion, marked that period in European history. The idea of a shared European narrative was becoming more complex, more contested, and more necessary at that time. the other, like a set of events that marked the context that Europe was facing was destruction of cultural heritage and the wars that were going inside the heart of Europe. So Dubrovnik in Croatia was the first World Heritage Site ever that was attacked and destroyed in 1990s. And a response, let's say, was pretty not based on any kind of expectation and preparation. It was more individual response of the experts from across the world and very small, not equipped facts-finding missions that were coming from Council of Europe and UNESCO to find, to decide. So some cities, rather than international community, some cities decided to support recovery of the roofs of the palaces in Dubrovnik to preserve it from further deterioration. So Europe was unprepared. It was in shock for that. And, you know, this continued, probably because of being unprepared to react properly. Croatia, Bosnia, Kosovo, Macedonia, Serbia were involved in this war. All of them were left alone to deal with their problems. And that was the context in which we were faced with the questions. What does heritage do? So navigating the aftermath of the wars in Croatia, Bosnia, Kosovo, Serbia, even Macedonia, Northern Macedonia, partially, where cultural heritage had been deliberately targeted, not as a collateral damage, but as a weapon of identity destruction. And questions of memory, belonging, and coexistence were not abstract. They were urgent and deeply political. The burning down of the largest Bosnian library, National and University Library in Bosnia, and the representative historic building in which it was housed, was the moment when the citizens of besieged Sarajevo, first and foremost, as well as a large portions of the world public, started pointing out that the destruction of cultural heritage was an aim of the war. Numbers make abstract the destruction that was planned, selective, imbued with character, and performed from proximity. After the destruction, in many cases, the blasted or burnt remains were removed from the sites of destroyed buildings to make it impossible to recover them. And the pseudo-rituals thrown into the cultural heritage mass graves which was performed. And these mass graves with the human remains mixed with the fragments of the heritage objects, places, they were hardly accessible, usually. Here you can see the fragments of one of the most famous mosques from 16th century in eastern Bosnia, one of 1,179 mosques fully destroyed, erased. And these fragments were looming out from the mass grave when the commission that was looking for the missing bodies in 2004, and the mosque was destroyed in 1992. They excavated at the place across this detention camp in Foča, and they invited me and my team from Commission to Preserve National Monuments to come to check if the pieces of stones are worth of anything. And they were the fragments of a mosque. Then the whole ritual came out, we came to know that all 17 mosques in that town were destroyed in 2 or 3 days. That the blast was so, strong that the fragments of the mosque could be seen at that 2004 in the trees, high trees surrounding the site. After destruction, they removed all fragments to 3 sites, one of them mass grave and 2 others the river bed, under the bridge and to some kind of hardly accessible part. And some of the fragments were too heavy that the river did not roll them in the bed so we could excavate them from the river bed. And after that, after this, like burying and throwing away the fragments, the perpetrators of the crime came back to the site to celebrate destruction and destruction of community, of people, because it was the part of genocidal action. And they celebrated it roasting pig at the site. But some of you might know that Muslims do not eat pork. So it was some kind of desecration of the site that could be imagined by them. And everything was some kind of interpretation by perpetrators. So the heritage has the power. It can be an agent of conflict-inducing, conflict-producing, and conflict-maintaining. This is unfortunately not working because my computer is not compatible with the computer here, although these wonderful people dealing with techniques tried to solve it. It was a video of destruction of the famous old bridge in Mostar. So I wanted to show it how, after being exposed over days and days to shooting, after being somehow, let's say, sheltered, provisionally sheltered by the people with a flag with a Hague blue shield, exposed there how the bridge, in fact, got its final hit when the fragments of this, more than a half-millennium old structure that had a strong symbolic value were cascading into the water. And when they were cascading into the water, this wave, that the splash that went up almost to the height of the original, top of the original bridge, turned into red. So people immediately constructed myths. They were, let's move on. Yeah. They were so touched by destruction of the bridge that some of them said, I turned into the stone, I couldn't move. It was like I lost the closest family member. Some of them said, I don't know how to move on in my life. The most famous article was written by a Croatian writer and publisher, Slavenka Drakulic, Elegy for Mostar Bridge, in which she explained that at the time when the bridge was destroyed, at the same time, she was able to watch and see CNN, BBC, and as the whole world, scenes from Bosnia. And there was one scene about, killing the people in the streets in Sarajevo. And she said there was a woman killed at the street. And we were watching that. After that, the news about destruction of the bridge came. And while watching that, we were crying. So what makes us being so hit by the news on destruction of bridge, that we cry after its destruction and not after killing of a person. And then she said, the bridge in our minds is something that was built to outlive all of us. It is all of us from ever forever. A woman is one of us. We are mortal. But these buildings, like the bridge, are in fact something that give us the sense of durability, of immortality, of the sense of our being in the world. And this destruction of Old Bridge in Mostar represented the beginning of a new era in the approach to heritage. Let me just go back to the red color. It was, in fact, the component in the mortar that was waterproof, that was between two layers of intrados, and intrados is, I don't know how many architects and technical persons are here. It is the, the vault of the bridge that is facing the water, and, the pavement for the walking. So there was a mortar that was composed of the, of the components, bauxite components, alumina, etc., gave this red color, and they were waterproof. Very wise, let's say, solution from 16th century. So when it was destroyed, of course, it dissoluted in water, and water turned red. However, people were talking about bridge that was bleeding. For them, they interpreted the destruction once when it was destroyed as, let's say, the being as an entity that has a right to live, as an entity that has a power to be an agent of the processes. So I'm showing one of these 1,179 masks that, let me show it again. It was like this at the time when I was able to visit it in 2002. And it is in Banja Luka, again, one of 16 mosques destroyed in the same town. The fragments were thrown in the lakes, etc. But it was reconstructed. And I'm quoting here Freud, that I will mention several times during this speech. He said in 1916, during the First World War, when once the mourning is over, it will be found that our high opinion of the riches of civilization has lost nothing from our discovery of their fragility. We shall build up again all that war has destroyed, and perhaps on firmer ground and more lastingly than before. So that was some kind of the commitment of people in Bosnia to survive through rebuilding the, let's say, riches of civilization that made them feeling or healing the feeling of placelessness that they were exposed to. now I will just briefly go through the discussions on reconstruction of the old bridge in Mostar that started immediately after it was destroyed, although the people were starving, they were expelled from their homes. And it is interesting that, in fact, the destruction of the bridge in Mostar mobilized the world. So once when the physical bridge was destroyed, the bridges across, the people, solidarity started being built, these intangible bridges. So this is one of suggestions of Italian team, Armali, Blasi, and Hanna, who suggested that the design objective of the reconstruction was to build new structures similar to the destroyed bridge. So they suggested that the same form is rebuilt in new material, like concrete. The famous architect Andrea Bruno, Italian architect and world-renowned architect, dealing with cultural heritage, on the other side, considered that the full story should be narrated through the reconstruction. So that the reconstruction should be interpretation, of course. I proposed not to rebuild the bridge as it was, but only to keep the remaining parts as an example to show that we cannot just destroy heritage. I followed the original shape with a metallic structure. I also kept the small bridge they had built immediately after the destruction to still be able to cross the river. So you can see here. So he wanted to keep these original, let's say, limbs preserved. This is the small bridge that is a replica of this provisional bridge that was built during the war to cross the river. And this is this structure that is more sculpture, or the ghost of the lost bridge. And of course, he said this means that we could see at the same time the three different phases: the original bridge that was destroyed, the preliminary crossing, and finally the proposed metallic structure of the project. It would be a testimony of the things that should not be done. It was high intellectual discussion and proposal. A lot of experts loved it. However, people did not want to consider it at all. They wanted their bridge to be reconstructed with recycling everything what could be recycled from the authentic fragments, with the same material at the same place, with the same dimensions, even deformations that were a result of the time of existence were demanded to be there. They wanted to feel safe in the environment that they know, and the bridge was the strongest formative element forming their sense of belonging to a home. And it was so, the voices were so loud concerning that, the emotions were so strong. And the interpretation of this is here. Oh my God, what did I do? Help me, please. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I pressed something that I should not have done. Okay, we are here, thank you very much. So this stone is one of the authentic stones, original stones from the destroyed bridge. A lot of them could not be used, but they are exposed at the river bank now because, it was not safe to reuse them. They were for so many years in the river. And this is spontaneous way of interpretation. Don't forget that, in fact, conveys the message that bridge is not anymore historical building. that the values, historical value, aesthetic value, architectural value, structural value, all of those that we attributed to the bridge, townscape value, are in fact overshadowed by the memorialization value. It became more memorial than a building, than an element in the city. And this, don't forget, does not exclude anyone, does not judge anyone, and it was really, it was not by those who are experts, professionals in interpretation. It is by someone who lives there. And this, even for this photo, I don't know, probably people sit here. The photo is beautiful. This Bosnian carpet is also somehow testifying the life that was brought back there. So let's go back to the European context in which Faro Convention, in which decision to work on this convention started, and our discussions were colored by this context. Globally, this was also a period shaped by the aftermath of September 11 attacks, which redefined conversations around security, intercultural relations, and the risks of polarization across the world. Culture was increasingly seen not only as a space of expression, but also as a potential site of tension, or alternatively, of a dialogue. At the same time, Europe was beginning, or going on through the process, more critically with its own past, including the long and unfinished processes of decolonization. Questions of ownership, representation, and historical accountability were gaining prominence, challenging traditional, state-centered, and expert-driven models of heritage. It is in this context that Faro represents a quiet but profound shift. Rather than focusing on monuments, objects, or preservation alone, it makes a paradigm shift. Heritage is not just about what is protected, but about how we live together. And in doing so, it moves heritage from the margins of policy to the center of democratic life, social cohesion, and ultimately peace. Objective of my talk today, with the risk of omitting important elements of the underestimated Faro Convention, and I think that, we are now talking about this wonderful document. So my objective is to talk about heritage as an agent of peace. The heritage's binary existence in social life is most pronounced in conflict prevention, peacemaking, peacekeeping, and peace-building processes. And what I would like to stress, especially like new term that we have used in Mondia Cult, that is introduced by some theoreticians in peace studies, is peace formatting. That is something that is a process that goes on in harmony with peace building. If we say that peace building is a liberal approach to peace, liberal peace, coming from as a responsibility of international solidarity, international organizations, etc., peace formatting is in fact working on peace on small scale. And that's where heritage interpretation has its crucial role. So heritage serves as both an object of respect and protection and as a crucial agent in facilitating peace. So the questions that are raised in this process through Faro Convention are not anymore on the left-hand side. So always left and right is so risky to use as a terms. What do we do to save heritage? But on this really right side, what does heritage do? What does heritage do for societies, for people? So let's go back a little to the history. The 1933, the years that we are now recalling so frequently in our memory, trying to make some parallels in the crazy world that we unfortunately are witnessing to. In 1932, Albert Einstein was commissioned by the League of Nations that was established at that time to define the most important question for the humankind and to find another person to discuss that question with that person. So the question is, as you can see, Waarom krig? Why war? He said that it is the most persistent and the most appalling question in the history of humankind. And the person that he chose to have this correspondence with was Sigmund Freud. So asking him, is there any way to free mankind from the menace of war? And expressing his talks and understandings that, as Einstein said, war is linked to political structures, to this strict sovereignty of the nations, and that the solution may lie in international governance and law that are above this sovereignty, that sovereignty has some kind of a limits until it becomes violent and war-producing. So that was Einstein's, let's say, in nutshell, who did not read this wonderful small booklet. It is you can access it at the network on UNESCO web pages and the other. It's a beautiful correspondence and still relevant. So Freud introduces his theory of eros, life instinct, which drives toward unity, love, and creation, and thanatos, death instinct, that drives toward aggression, destruction, war. For Freud, war is an expression of innate human aggression. Violence is not an accident. It is structural to humanity. So it was very pessimistic, the writings, his thoughts. So he said that human beings naturally form groups. Groups generate internal cohesion. And this internal cohesion, in fact, produces external hostility. So any kind of community in rigid terms is some kind of the kernel of the hostility towards the other communities. He said this makes conflict almost inevitable. This is the photo of, I don't know who recognizes this. It is one of the World Heritage Places. The how it's called, the Caves of Patriarchs, or the Ibrahim Mosque in Hebron, that is shared between Jews and Muslims, the place that is considered sacred, important for both of them. And this kind of sharing the place is in a way that it reflects the conflict. So even when it is shared, it can produce the conflict. The question for us is how to convert this beautiful, loved place by the communities into the place of encounters, understanding, and finding common values that are embodied in the very building, in the very site, in the history, and are looking for us, for some generations, to identify them, to interpret them, to insist on them. So now I'm copying the part from Freud's responses. Can war be prevented? What Freud said. He's cautious but not hopeless. He says peace requires emotional bonds between people. Cultural and intellectual development, including education and critical thinking, are the methods that these emotional bonds can be operationalized. And so this is, in fact, one of the key elements in his response. That the transfer of power from individuals, from elite, should be done to larger combination that is founded on the community of sentiments, linking up its members. Community of sentiments, not community of religion, not community of nation, not community. So we will mention how it echoes in Faro Convention later on. Whatever makes for cultural development is working also against war. This is Freud's sentence that gives us a right to decide that heritage can be agent of peace formatting and peace building at the same time. So just to conclude this discussion, let's say in one sentence between these two figures, that peace must be constructed and constantly maintained. So in practice, all this, how it is expressed, if we use heritage as an agent of peace formatting, it creates emotional connections across groups, builds inclusive shared identities, not exclusive ones, enables critical reflection on the past, supports education and dialogue. However, heritage can be also weaponized, and it can be used to freeze identity, like pure identity, ours identity, original identity, etc., etc. We can hear a lot of words like that today as well. Reinforces historical grievances without interpretation, as in our group when we worked the first day on the open space, we have testified to, etc., etc. So there is another, when we are speaking about what is peace theories that can be related to the power of heritage, and especially heritage interpretation in the Pharaoh spirit, I would like to mention the very important person that in 1960s again was commissioned by the, not League of Nations, but UNESCO, UN, to make some kind of a report on peace, and that is Galtung, that is 60s. So Galtung, in fact, identified that violence, which people usually consider as the only war, is direct violence. And it is, in fact, the violence that is inflicting physical harm. And it is performed through intentional acts, visible and immediate. Examples of these direct violence are war, terrorism, physical assault, destruction of property, etc. However, so people usually link the notion of war with this definition, or the lack of peace. Galtung brings to the stage this triangle, and he says that this is visible. You can see this line of visibility that is waving line. Direct violence is the visible one, but there is another one that is structural violence. And the structural violence is harm embedded in systems and institutions. It is indirect, often invisible, normalized. And the examples are inequality, exclusion from education or opportunities, discrimination embedded in policies, unequal access to cultural participation. And the third one, that is the cultural violence. And cultural violence operates through ideology, religion, language, historical narratives, cultural symbols. And it is the deepest one, the least visible and the most persistent. Examples are us versus them, different narratives, glorification of war, exclusionary national histories, denial or distortion of past violence. Building on this, let me see what. Building on his theory of direct structural and cultural violence, Johann Galtung proposed a corresponding way to understanding peace. Peace is not one-dimensional. It has three interconnected layers: negative peace, absence of direct violence, absence of physical conflict, necessary but not sufficient to be a peace. We have to have a negative peace if we are talking about a peace, but it's not sufficient. So then he talks about positive or structural peace, which in fact is the peace where there is absence of structural violence, which means presence of justice, inclusion, fair systems. And this, in fact, addresses structural peace, addresses root causes of conflict. And positive peace also has to be based on cultural peace. That is, what we can do through interpretation. Transformation of cultural violence. Presence of shared values, mutual recognition, narratives that support coexistence. Sustainable peace, that slide is not so visible, requires all three. If one is missing, peace remains fragile. So what I, in fact, wanted to make is to insist on is making some kind of ecosystem of peace. Galtung's distinction between negative and positive peace maps directly onto the logic of Faro Convention. While negative peace, the mere absence of conflict, has little to do with heritage, Faro operates firmly with a realm of positive and structural peace by addressing the deeper conditions that sustain stability. Traditionally, heritage has operated at the level of stability, protection, safeguarding, which is essential, but limited when we talk about the heritage. Statutory protection, conservation measures, physical work, even management. This is what Galtung would call the conditions of negative peace. And in this ecosystem that echoes Faro Convention and heritage, this is this, let's say, necessary circle, but which is not the heart of the processes. Faro Convention expands this into centrality shift from heritage objects and expressions to communities. Its emphasis on the right to cultural heritage, democratic participation and shared responsibility contributes to structural peace by promoting inclusion, equity, and access, thereby countering forms of structural violence. And that's, where Faro Convention is really revolutionary document at that time. But the real shift happens here at the level of meaning. What is, in fact, the field where interpretation is at home. And the cultural environment. That is also the concept from the Faro Convention. This scheme presents heritage ecosystem as defined by the Faro Convention. This is where identities are shaped, where narratives are negotiated, and where the line between us and them is either drawn or dismantled. Concepts such as heritage communities and critical engagement with the past work against cultural violence by enabling plural narratives, recognition of plural identities, and dialogue across difference. In this sense, Faro positions cultural heritage as an active mechanism through which both structural and cultural dimensions of positive peace are constructed and maintained. It resonates Freud's ideas that peace depends on people forming emotional identifications beyond their immediate group. This is key. The psychological basis of intercultural dialogue and recovery of mutual trust and coming to terms with past through memory. And here you can see photos. I was free to use some vignettes from Bosnia, although I could use them from the other parts, from Syria, from Mosul, from Palestine and Israel, from Kosovo, and different parts of the world where I have been working in some kind of a forensics of heritage. Trying to understand the ruins and how their recovery, their reconstruction can become the recovery of communities, of people. And this is, the first, a visit of the site of the 16th century Christian Orthodox monastery in Bosnia that was destroyed in 1993. And you can see how this first visit at the site, when it was still risky, to go there and to be together, started with this gathering of different religious leaders that committed themselves to be together, to invite, and a small group of refugees. Soon after the reconstruction started, the school for children was recovered. and the people started coming back to their villages surrounding the monastery because they were reclaiming their right to be what they are. The Faro Convention reframed heritage as a people-centered, participatory, and meaning-driven process. What we see today is that this shift is being reinforced from two complementary directions, at least. Policy for the integration of a sustainable development perspective into the processes of World Heritage Convention, which introduces critical layer of heritage as an agency of social inclusion, economic development, environmental sustainability, peace and security, is a UNESCO document. It explicitly recognizes the inherent potential of World Heritage properties and their conservation efforts to positively contribute to conflict resolution and the restoration of peace and security. I just would like to make some kind of digression. You know, we in this field, heritage field, usually have some kind of topics that become the more persistent in certain periods. So, you know, that the Venice Charter introduced the notion of authenticity in its preamble. And since then, since 1964, it has been one of the, let's say, the most challenging concept, because in some cultural contexts, authenticity as a concept does not exist. So in 1994, a myriads of discussions, fora, etc., were going on, and they resulted in very famous NARA document on authenticity, in which this plurality of the cultural context was anticipated. And it was in Japan, where the concept of authenticity, if any, is totally different from European. So this is 1994. Then reconstruction, that was something that was ruled out a priori. After wars in Croatia, Bosnia, and Kosovo, etc., in Europe, became a method of perpetuation of heritage, the only method. What do you do when the whole system, the whole framework is destroyed? The only method to perpetuate heritage, to establish continuity, is to reconstruct. So discussions were going on since 1990s, and in 2014, it was the year when a lot of documents started being published as a result of such work by World Bank, by UNESCO, by ICOMOS, by ICROM, etc. So reconstruction is now something that is in doctrine very well defined, reconstruction and recovery, like authenticity. And 2026 is a year of heritage as an agent of peace. So I have been participating at, let's say, at least 10 fora in Europe and globally talking about heritage and peace. And after this, there will be a Europa Nostra summit in Cyprus. There will be some other meetings, and it will be the central topic. So I hope that we will have together some kind of a, document that makes it doctrinal approach. The other document that I'm talking about that reflects, that echoes this, let's say, Council of Europe concepts expressed to Faro Convention is the UNESCO Expert Report on Culture for Peace prepared for Mondia Cult 2025, which introduces the idea of peace as a mosaic. This is not just a metaphor. It is a way of understanding peace as composed of multiple interconnected cultural dimensions, including creative practices, cultural heritage, education and pedagogy, justice and rights-based approaches, digital innovation, and everyday forms of cultural expression. Each of these is a distinct entry point into peace building and peace formatting, but none is sufficient in its own. These three, Faro Convention and these two that I mentioned, are not separate frameworks. They are three layers of the same shift. Faro Convention begins with meaning, with people, interpretation, and how we define belonging. The policy for the integration of a sustainable development perspective into the processes of the World Heritage Convention gives stability, systems, protection, continuity. And the expert report on culture for peace of UNESCO for Mondia Cult brings connection, culture as a mosaic through which peace is lived and created. And now I will not, delve into this. This is just some graphics that I borrowed from the institutes that are trying to go, there is this Canadian Institute on Peace that publishes every year index of peace in the world. But it is index of negative peace, where there are no armed conflicts and terrorism acts. However, since 2 years ago, some institutions started dealing with the positive peace, trying to identify 100,000 criteria of positive peace. Well, it's really, and it is still, it is not to be presented, but then there are some forecastings concerning the future of, let's say, peace and war, and some research. So these are top 5 risks that are threatening peace in the world, which were selected by respondents, by interlocutors during the research. So it is not, let's say, evidence-based, it's more some kind of this trying to find what the different stakeholders think. And you can, as they can be read, I will not repeat them. So it is the context in which we live. Geoeconomic confrontation, state-based armed conflict, extreme weather events, societal polarization and misinformation and disinformation that is due to, of course, living in this digital world as well. What is given here as a landscape of global risks is in fact showing how these, how these social issues such as inequality, geoeconomic confrontation, decline in health, etc. So there's a societal polarization, erosion of human rights. So this is the triangle, in fact, that is extremely important to deal with in all our heritage studies and heritage interpretation studies are in fact presented as some kind of the extremely impactful risks to the peace today and the results of the risks we are exposed to. This is also some kind of the pattern of the risks where those that are erosion of human rights, societal polarization, cyber insecurity, etc., are in fact insufficient public infrastructure, showing that they are both high at this short-term severity, severe now, in 2 years, but they are also highly recognized as something that will persist in the long term. So both in long term and short term, these risks persist. And that is, in fact, something that we have to have in mind when we are talking about what is the part of conclusion of my lecture. Faro Convention today and tomorrow, 20 years after its, let's say, inception of these revolutionary ideas by the Faro Convention. The Faro Convention was visionary, but it was designed for a different moment in our history. Today we face digital transformation, climate crisis, different increased polarization and contested identities, and global mobility and fragmented belongings. Fragmented belonging, that is one of the risks. So, what can we do? What I suggest when we deal with Faro, there is a huge potential in this idea and spirit of Faro. But my suggestion is that it can evolve across 3 dimensions for the beginning, from participation to co-creation. So we should insist not only on access, but shared authorship across digital and physical spaces. Then the other shift is from community to fluid identities. That will include diasporas, hybrid belonging, overlapping groups which are not fixed. So one person can belong to different groups that are formed on a basis of Freud's definition. The third one is shift from heritage as a resource, as it was defined in Faro Convention, resource of development, to heritage as a resilience infrastructure for climate change adaptation, social cohesion under the stress, etc. There are the other, so, what did I, so you cannot see behind a scene from Mosul, where women and men are working on the reconstruction of El-Nouri Mosque. That is the mosque where Baghdadi declared Islamic State, and which was blasted upon when they came to know that the Islamic State was destroyed, that it does not exist. So they destroyed the mosque and the very famous Al-Khadba minaret. So it's now reconstructed, but you know, these people who were freed of pressure and women who were under such a kind of a horrible pressure were reconstructing it, recovering their right to work, to be masters, to be stonemasons, to be whatever they want, what was not possible, what is still not possible in some societies that are exclusive. So what we can see as some kind of a potential Faro Convention is that heritage moved from reflecting society to actively stabilizing it under the pressure. Then, let me see, from physical heritage to digital algorithmic heritage, from physical heritage only, let's say, to digital algorithmic heritage. Heritage is increasingly digital, mediated by platforms and algorithms, and we cannot deny it. Risks of these are misinformation, echo chambers, manipulation of narratives. But opportunities are new forms of participation and connection. So what we have to accept is that we have to do this like a shift from heritage spaces and heritage objects to heritage ecosystems across realities. Again, you cannot see Banksy's very famous piece, graffiti. Then the next shift can be from the people-centered approach that I'm advocating very much to the holistic, balanced, and responsible approach. So it was great 20 years ago to shift from objects to people, from inanimate objects to people, to communities. But today we are aware that this like anthropocentric approach is something that we have to unpack and to go into the holistic, balanced and responsible approach, responsible towards the other communities that we share the world with. Then from accessibility concerning cultural rights, from cultural rights that in fact stresses the accessibility, to cultural justice and repair. So we should or we can move beyond access toward restitution debates, decolonial practices, addressing historical harm. Positive peace requires recognition, repair, and not neutrality. Neutrality that we have been bombed with as some kind of the framework that we have to do is something that is one of the highest risks to peace. So I suggest the shift from inclusion to historical accountability. From cultural environment to peace environments, I suggest to expand the idea of cultural environment that was also some kind of a new concept in Faro Convention, into intentional spaces for coexistence as designed environments for interaction, empathy, and dialogue. So in fact, it is a shift from our understanding of the power of context to our responsibility to design conditions for peace, to change the context, and this context is not peace building. So, to conclude, positive peace is not achieved by inclusion alone. It requires agency, accountability, and the continuous negotiation of meaning. And this is precisely where an evolved Faro Convention can have its greatest impact. It is a lot of job and huge, monumental task in front of us. I hope that we will have a strength to respond to it. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amra. That was very inspiring. Do you have any questions or comments? Yeah. Can I say that the Mostar Bridge, I visited Mostar Bridge. I remember its destruction very clearly, and I remember its reconstruction. And if there is anything that's a symbol of peace and reconciliation, it is that bridge. When I visited it, it's deeply moving to see it there. And of course, bridges are connections. They connect. And there in Mostar, it was connecting societies and cultures. It's fantastic.
If I can comment that, in fact, the bridge was a bridge.
Yes.
Beautiful bridge before it was destroyed. Once, when it was destroyed through conflict, and it was destroyed as a symbol, then it became the symbol of connecting the communities, divisions, diversities. So before that, it was just a beautiful building, historical building, you know, just a site. After destruction, it became the symbol of connecting. Huh?
Okay, Amra, thank you. Patrick, do you want to?
Thank you very much. So, I am speechless. This was one of the most touching speeches I have ever heard.
Oh, thank you, Fab. Thank you. I love this song. It's beautiful. So thank you very much for your patience.